Welcome everyone to Numerical Gems in the Torah. In Parshat Vayigash, Yosef finally reveals himself to his brothers, and he cries as part of his revealing himself a number of times. And yet, if we look at a number of parshas where Yosef appears, we see that he cries 7 different times. This is more than anyone else in the entire Bible. In the whole Tanakh, we don't see any other individual crying 7 times. Now, there's a little bit of history behind this, because we see that his father, Yaakov, he also cries. The first time when he meets Rachel, his soulmate, his wife-to-be, he cries. And later, when he hears that Yosef, he thinks, at least the brothers make it appear that he was ripped apart by a wild animal, he also cries. And in a previous parsha, it says, Eila toldot Yaakov Yosef. These are the generations of Yaakov, Yosef. In other words, of all the brothers, Yosef is chosen as if he's the only descendant of Yaakov, because he was the favorite. He was the one that Yaakov gave over all of his inner teachings. So we see also that the portion that Yosef is born is the 7th portion of the Torah. And in that portion of Parshat Vayetze, and in that portion, Yaakov promises to work 7 years to marry Rachel. And then when Lavan switches Leah for Rachel, he then pledges to work another 7 years for Rachel, even though he married her 7 days later. So the number 7 comes up over and over again, and that's the portion that Yosef is born in, the 7th portion. So here we see that Yosef is crying 7 times. But he's not the first person in the Torah to cry. Avram cries when Sarah is buried and dies. We see that Hagar cries when she feels she and her son are going to die in the desert with no water. Esav cries when he feels that his father has given away the blessing that he thought would be his. So many people cry, and we see there are tears of disappointment, tears of frustration, tears of dejection, tears of bereavement. But in Yosef's case, most of the time, the tears are tears of compassion, because he very much wants to reunify the family. And he's overwhelmed with tears many, many different times. But it's coming from a deep, compassionate place. It says in the Zohar, a very important idea. It says, B'chia tekia b'liba b'sitra da, b'chedva tekia b'liba b'sitra da. Crying is wedged in one part of my heart, and joy is wedged in the other part of my heart. So it's usually understood that, like King Solomon, Shlomo Melech says, there's a time for everything under heaven. There's a time to laugh, and there's a time to cry. So that's, on a certain level, that's what the Zohar is saying, that there's crying on one part of my heart and joy on the other part of my heart. Reb Shlomo Carlebach, among others, teaches it's not just that there is a time for crying and there's a time for laughing, of tears and joy, but in a certain sense, they should be happening simultaneously. The way that Reb Shlomo explained it was, when I look at the world and I see what a broken place it is. So much suffering, so much hatred, so many wars. How can I not be crying on the inside? And yet when I look at the world, I also see what a beautiful place. How many good people there are. How wonderful the creation is. How can I not be joyous? So this is the metaphor of breaking a glass at the wedding. Under the canopy, under the chuppah, at the height of joy, we break a glass to remember Yerushalayim. So this is the idea of laughter and crying on both sides of my heart together. But now let's add a numerical gem here, that bechia, as in the statement in the Zohar, equals 37. Chedva, which is one of the words of joy, equals 23. Well, what can we connect that to? So here, it almost sounds that crying comes first, and then comes joy. And we say that in one of the songs of ascent, Shir Malot, that we say every time we bench, we do grace after meals. So we say, Hazorim bedima, Barina yiksaru. The one who plants in tears will reap in joy. This is the idea of exile and redemption. Darkness and then light. Crying that will lead to joy. We're actually taught by the sages that anyone who cries over the destruction of the temple will merit to see the rebuilding in great joy. So here it sounds almost chronological. First comes crying, then comes joy. And that's what it says in the Zohar. But there's a different model that we could see it more as not just before, but higher. How is that? We know that there are 5 levels of the soul. The nefesh is what's called the animal soul, the most connected to the body. The ruach is the emotional component of a human being. The neshama is the intellectual part of the human psyche. And then the 2 higher levels are called chaya and yechida. Chaya equals 23, the same as chedva, joy. But above it is yechida. The chaya in the soul is very connected to the will. It's the transcendent will behind almost everything that a human being does. The yechida, though, is even a higher level, and that is the point of godliness within the human being, within the soul. So chaya, the will, equals 23, and it equals chedva, joy. But even above that is the unique aspect of the godliness within each person, and that equals crying, bechia. So here we introduce another type of crying, and that is something probably everyone has experienced one time or another, what are called the tears of joy. Here we're not talking about opposites. There's a time for crying and a time for joy. Here we're talking very much the unity that I'm broken and joyous at the same time. That's the way I experience the world, that it's a broken world and yet it's a beautiful world simultaneously. So tears of joy is when something very, very positive happens, something very surprising, unexpected, a high moment in our family, a wedding, or a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, a birth, where we're so overwhelmed with joy, we cry. That is almost a natural reaction, is tears of joy. So here we've seen there are all kinds of crying, and truthfully, there's all kinds of levels of joy. But here, when we put tears together with joy, this is the kind of tears that hopefully we will all experience with the coming of Mashiach, the coming of the full redemption in the world, that, as it says in the Song of Ascents that we quoted before, will be like dreamers, and our mouths will be full of laughter. But even higher, we should all merit to cry tears of joy with the coming of the full redemption of the world and peace between all peoples.